Hello and welcome to today's Mediaworks Masterclass that's focused on strategy and insight. My name is David Norris, I'm the Group Operations Director and I'll be hosting today's Masterclass. Natalie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Natalie. I'm Strategic Planning Director at Mediaworks, so very much involved in audience insight, market research, competitor analysis and how that then translates into forming channel plans for our clients.
Hi, my name is Rachel and I'm Data and Insights Director at Mediaworks, and my day-to-day role is all around measurement, tracking, reporting, like how do we really understand what's going on with our digital marketing.
And hi, I'm Paul. I'm Managing Partner at Mediaworks. I look after our creative and the strategy and insights team. So I work very closely with Nat, Rach and the other guys, looking at what we're doing for clients and kind of imagining what could be better or different, or getting very excited about new technologies and tools that are out there, amongst other things.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think the first question for me would be, or the first point would be, I think strategy and insights mean different things in different businesses and are words that are thrown around in pretty much all organisations these days. So, Paul, I'm going to come to you first and ask sort of, I guess, when we say strategy and insights for the purpose of this masterclass and across MediaWorks, what do we actually mean?
When you say strategy, I say and insights, right? So what do we think this is all about? It's all about how we give our clients a competitive advantage. That's what all of this boils down to, really. And I think for us in the team, there isn't. We do slightly different things, but it's all kind of getting to the same point: is what can we discover? What can we get out of either what's going on in the world, what's going on in the market, what's going on with audiences, what's going on with trends, but also then what does the data show us, and whether that's our first-party data that a client owns or third-party tools. But we're kind of synthesizing all of that together to say, okay, and where's the opportunity? Where can we gain an edge? Where's there a gap in the market? Where's there an opportunity that we can work with our client to kind of exploit that gap and kind of drive their commercial success? So I think you kind of think that it's about audiences and trends and behaviour and that kind of thing. It is about all of those things, but it's about how we can study that to look at gaining an advantage. Yeah,
and I think for me, one of the really interesting thing about sort of audiences, channels, tactics, etc., like it's always moving. Like it never ever stands still. So like, what are some of the challenges then, like that we are seeing that from an audience and a channel perspective?
I think exactly that, in terms of just how fast consumer preferences are changing. We've got a lot of different like messaging and creative needing to change based on kind of what's happening in the world. So for example, went through a cost of living crisis. Now people are worried about cost, but actually now people potentially are losing trust in brands. So it's all about having an authentic tone of voice. So there's so many different consumer preferences changing, not only with the messaging that they want, but then also we've got channels as well changing. We've got new channels entering the market. I mean, TikTok obviously has exploded in the past couple of years. We've got Google with PMax changes, the new channels that are being brought into the mix. And I think there's research that shows at least like 65% of us are on at least 8 channels. So there's new channels entering the market. We're trying to obviously cut through on the channels that people are already on. But then likewise, we've got to do kind of the competitor analysis, as Paul was mentioning, looking at that landscape. Is there new channels that we should be on, that competitors are on, or that they aren't on, where there's an opportunity for us? So kind of looking holistically at that kind of, I suppose, mix of channels is actually really important. And I suppose a big challenge for us is just managing that, and then coupled with managing the creative and the messaging element of it. What do we need to say to the right people on the right channels? So I think there's kind of like a range of kind of different challenges amongst that. But then actually the real thing is, how do we cut through? How do we make sure that we're actually driving impact and the content that we're creating is effective? I think that's probably one of the biggest challenge as a planner, is knowing kind of like what is the right challenge? Who's your audience? How do we make sure that the message cuts through? And I suppose like taking TikTok I was reading an article the other day around like how many videos get created every hour on TikTok, and it's like 16,000. So imagine like now trying to create a piece of content for the right audience on TikTok to then cut through 16,000 videos. That's getting creative. So I think it's kind of leveraging, making sure that we understand the audience, what they want, the challenges then coupled with the right channels, new channels coming in, and then ultimately how do we cut through? And I think I know Rachel might touch on it in a bit later on, but based on all of that, the view of data that we have, it's not all in one place. So it's kind of overwhelming once you get all of that insight, and trying to find that element of true insight within that can obviously be a major challenge. We've got CRM systems, we've got Google Analytics 4, we've got in-platform and Meta and TikTok giving us all different metrics. So having that cohesive view of one audience and what they want and how it's performing is actually a really big challenge as well.
Yeah, I think the follow-up to me on that would be as well, I think what we're seeing is a lot of the channels are talking about being full funnel solutions as well now, whereas I think what we used to talk about was channels, I guess, dominating a particular part of the funnel or being focused on particular activity, whereas I think now what we're seeing is, I say Google, TikTok, Meta, etc. Even SEOs now being seen much more full funnel. And I think one of the points, and probably Paul, you can follow up on this, is I think one of the biggest challenges now is how do you integrate creative with all of that, and where does that fit in as part of that part of the journey, and understanding that yes, there's an audience. How do you essentially align channels, messaging, creative with those?
And then adding things like you're going to go in several different European markets where actually all the different preferences and behaviours are slightly different. So yeah, I think I was doing a pitch yesterday, and the way that we're looking at creative varies as you go through the funnel. And yeah, you need to have creative that is, I mean, in some ways, nothing has changed very much. You've got a creative that's going to drive awareness at the top of the funnel, and then as you go through consideration to purchase, it gets closer to conversion. But I think it's then saying, okay, and how do you appear? How can you be like? How do you get cut through? But cut through is one thing, but how do you make sure that you're playing by that channel's rules? So you're kind of presenting content in the right kind of style. TikTok is very different from Reddit, is very different from YouTube. So I think this is why this is a critical part of strategy is, we always do the strategy before we brief the medium, before we brief the creative, so that we can have a clear idea of the channels that we're going to be in, and then make the real specific recommendations for how creative needs to adapt to those. But I think Nat's point about it being quite overwhelming, it certainly can be. And, as you multiply up the number of channels, just managing and tracking and being on top of that is a challenge that kind of hits Rachel's team. But I think, even if you just restrict it to looking at Google, say you're looking at Performance Max and you look at all the channels that are embedded within that, when you look at a typical campaign, the number of creative assets that you could have can be getting into the thousands to make it really effective. So, yeah, it's taking all that together. But I think the way that we conquer that is by having a good process, by being systematic about the steps that we go through. And, that's something that you learn over time is, don't put the cart before the horse. You can't design the creative till you know the channels.
Yeah. So once we've selected sort of channels, audience, creative, and align that, I think sort of to bring you in, Rachel, it often then comes back down to sort of measurement and reporting, and I think that has definitely got more complex over time. So I guess sort of how does all of that link with the strategy and insight that we're able to provide for clients, or things that people should be considering if they're sort of measuring and reporting in-house?
Yeah, definitely. We've got two probably biggest challenges when it comes to measurement. I think the first one is, and you'll hear this a lot, but it is around the privacy part. Users want more and more privacy than ever before. So they're tending to, opt out of cookies a lot more regularly. And there was this phrase that we were reading about called tracked and hacked. And apparently like 61% of users now feel like that is a big concern, and they get worried about their excessive use of cookies. And what that means is that actually ultimately your audience are willing to give brands less data. So when you're trying to do these really data-informed strategies, it becomes quite hard to do that because you don't really know. Research kind of suggested that actually your cookie opt-in rate can be anything from 4% to 85%. So, and the hardest thing for businesses there is actually you don't know how to measure it. So what you're faced with is you've got your analytics, you could be making decisions, and actually that could be based on 10% of your whole data. So actually it's very hard to know what to do next. I suppose that bit poses its own challenge, but then with measurement you've got the accuracy part of it. So one, less data means less accurate, but two, you get into the world of attribution, and actually what we see is now a customer journey features so many touch points that actually different platforms might all take credit for the same lead or the same amount of revenue. And it's like, okay, well, how do you really know to evaluate how effective your marketing's working, and then how do you replicate that and do more of it? Because actually it's quite hard. And you do see the likes of people obviously using web analytics platforms like a GA4 to do that. But I think the challenge that you have with that is I think it still penalises that above the line sort of media. And we know that when we're talking about full funnel, brand awareness, all of that is still super important in these journeys, in the research and the informational content, that sort of thing. So I think there are two challenges there, because even when you've got some data to look at, you don't really fully know how to assign it to a channel and give credit to it. And then ultimately, once you're in that boat, it's then, okay, well, how do you report on it? Because Nat mentioned it before, every platform's giving you tons of data metrics. Every platform can be used across the whole funnel, which means that there's probably different measurements at each stage of that. And actually, it's becoming incredibly time consuming to try and get that into one view. I think the thing that we have is that ultimately, none of these platforms entirely talk to each other. And what that means for us is that sort of reporting on that becomes more manual. Therefore, monthly, we spend a lot more time just pulling data together and putting it all in one place than we really do using it to create insight, action, moving forwards, next steps, things that we want to investigate more. We're kind of spending our time with reporting in the wrong place because it's so manual to now get all of these channels together and actually be able to say, okay, well, this is how performance is going. So kind of a few there, but ultimately they all kind of play a part and sort of have a knock-on impact into each other. Yeah,
I think one of the things I think for me is, as you say, we can spend a lot of time pulling the data, and I think like the real key thing for me is I know we've talked about this many a time, is as you've highlighted, what's the insight that you can derive from it? Like, what actionable changes would you make on the other side of seeing the data? So I guess when it comes to, you know, insight and strategy, it's almost like a virtuous circle. It's like the better the data that you have, the greater the insight that then informs your strategy, that then allows us to then get more data to inform that. So I guess what sort of...
Can I just say something? Because I think something really interesting with the cookie kind of problem.
Yeah.
In as much as, do people who accept cookies behave differently than people who don't? So you've almost kind of got a double problem. You've got less data, but is it a particular mindset of people that are more predisposed to digital channels, more comfortable with those things, and you're picking up their behaviour, versus a group that there's probably more of them and you're understanding less about them, but they might be the ones that are going to, I don't know, you're always looking for markets, you're always looking for audiences where there's more people that might buy once. And maybe they're the cookie averse ones.
Yeah, and the cookie averse ones might be the ones that actually maybe could be less digitally confident, and therefore those are the ones you want to try and convert and the ones you want to try and help guide through the process. But because you don't know them and you can't see them, it's then really hard to figure out, like, well, what's our strategy to go after this audience and encourage them and nudge them through the journey. It is really difficult.
So I was having a conversation with someone recently, and they were asking me about cookies, and it became a thing, and they've heard me talk about cookieless future, and they were telling me all about like their views on it. And I was saying that they were saying to me that they just outright reject all cookies, and I asked them why. Do you know, and their explanation was, well, I don't like the idea of people tracking me. And I went, well, one, what do you think the tracking you're doing? One. And then two, sort of, I then said to them, I accept cookies. And the reason I accept cookies is I actually want targeted advertising rather than more generic advertising towards me. And I do think it is that education piece. And especially, I know we've talked about cookieless future, and then Google did a U-turn on us, and we've like been going back and forward for the last however many years. But I think when I think of what they are now talking about now, which is, I think it's auto opt out, isn't it? And you have to opt in. That's the thing that they're now talking about rolling out. Like, I really do wonder sort of the implications of that and what that is going to mean for user experience and how people are going to feel when they're still going to get served ads. It's just potentially not as contextualized, not as tailored, etc. Because I don't know about you, if I ever see random ads, it's like I immediately see them as random ads and think, what a waste of, obviously what we do, I think, what a waste of money.
Yeah.
I always say to people, I've got a Google Pixel phone. My whole life is geared around my Google account. I've fully opted into everything. I give Google access to everything, and my life is amazing because of that. So fully integrated with Google Maps. If I'm on holiday, it knows that I've been somewhere before. All my news is the stuff that I'm interested in. And the behaviour that I'm reading in news affects the ads that I'm seeing. Yeah. It's great. Like, you know, I can't imagine that the world would be better with Google knowing less about me.
Yeah. But I do think that's the thing, because users talk about wanting more and more privacy, but every experience they want is super personalized. Exactly. And it's like, well, how can they give you that if they don't know anything about you? And I think that's always going to be the biggest part, which is, I think there is an education piece there.
Yeah. No, I think it is. And I think there's it is that antitrust thing, I think, plays a massive part in this. The idea of big corporations warehousing all this information on people. I think that's the bit that they get nervous about, rather than the outputs that they see as a result of that. And I think that's the real balance in all of this, really. It's like, we've just described how realistically people do want more personalized experiences, but they don't want to be the value privacy more. So they don't want to give the big systems, the big platforms data, but then ultimately personalization becomes more difficult, and therefore the marketing experience becomes more difficult from our perspective. So all of that in mind, and this is obviously a really simple question for the pair of you, Rich, and that is what ideas or approaches are we deploying then as a business to combat sort of some of the challenges we've described for our clients? And that'll come to you first.
Yeah, so I think the first one, when I was talking about kind of the changes in consumer preferences and the creative messaging, is actually now we're seeing a lot of brands obviously capitalize on the creativity. We're pushing more brands to kind of test different messages, test different formats. And I think especially we're seeing a lot of movement in that B2B space. I think it's kind of around 81% of different brands are now, well, it's perceived that kind of B2B is actually rivaling B2C advertising as well. So we're actually seeing a big movement in there, and it comes down to, again, we're moving away from, I suppose, traditional methods of like events or kind of trade shows or even like email marketing for the B2B world. And you can start to get really clever with targeting in terms of, again, within the platforms of like LinkedIn, where you can then start to target specific job titles, sectors. That obviously couples with the perfect campaign with that. So I think in terms of that, we've got kind of like creativity as a whole kind of being brought to the forefront, I think, in kind of different sectors and for different audiences. Then I think in terms of kind of the data exchange element, I think we are prioritising, we're seeing brands start to be a bit more clever and creative with the way they're starting to exchange data for, it's almost like a value exchange, let's say. I know when Rachel's talking there about opting in and opting out, obviously we need to now start to leverage something to get back from kind of the customers or users. So there's kind of like different ways that we're seeing people do it. I think the easiest one is kind of social polls, where we're asking people to like vote on different things. Do you like that product? Do you prefer this? Which is kind of, I suppose, more of the simple element of it. We've also got like value added content. You may purchase something or you may sign up, and then you get value added content, whether it's, I don't know, maybe like about how to train yourself for running, doing 5Ks, things like that, if I've bought some trainers. Or then we're seeing it in apps as well, aren't we? Where, I mean, Starbucks, I use a Starbucks app and it tells me like where I visit which is probably not a good thing, where I visit the most, get the most coffees, like how much I spend, but then ultimately I'm rewarded in loyalty points, which then I can then spend obviously back in store. So I'm then valued by the, like exactly what Paul was saying from a Google perspective, but almost Starbucks, based on me giving them my data and kind of them being able to personalize the experience in app. It's great. I think there's obviously loads of different apps that use it. Whirlpool's one that we've been looking at in terms of their app, where it's all around energy consumption. It can track me, tell me when the best time is to put a wash on, when not to, how much money I've saved. So again, kind of thinking about that consumer preference in terms of like changing behaviours, prioritising potentially like energy consumption, money saving, that's actually been trickled through into that value exchange of how do we then give you back some data, how do we give you data, for more value added experiences, which then obviously couples with the personalisation thing that we were talking about before around now I've given them the data, my experience is personalised, which I love. Yeah. Like you say, you kind of sometimes scrolling and thinking, how on earth am I actually targeted through that ad? Like, it's just completely random. So I think, again, there's various different people using personalization. Amazon, I'm constantly suggested other products that would go with products I've already bought, or maybe just like an add-on to something, again, that I've bought. Or like Netflix, I know they're testing like consumer psychology in terms of me watching romance films, and then all of the cards that I'm shown on the home screen are then tailored to more of like rom-com style imagery. Again, they're playing around with like creativity to kind of bring me in, but again, that's all based on what I say I like versus what I don't like. So the personalization is needed and wanted so much by everyone that really it kind of counteracts the whole opt-out in terms of data. So I think in terms of like trends that I think we're trying to combat and I suppose push on with is kind of looking at creativity based on different formats and channels, like testing like influencer marketing. We've got document ads now, more long form content versus trying to cut through in 5 seconds. So kind of creativity, we've got then obviously, like I said, with kind of data exchange and now trying to be clever in terms of how we extract that to then leverage personalization through kind of the full funnel for a lot of our clients anyways, how we're trying to kind of leverage those different trends.
And just to build on a couple of things that Nat said there, I know, Rachel, you're dying to get in, talk about attribution. So I creativity is still king, and in B2B advertising, there's still great examples out there. Most people are aware of things like Hiscox or The Economist, truly brilliant creative advertising that creates noise, talkability, cut through, and there's no substitute for that. I think the data exchange bit is getting really interesting. Something that I was talking about with one of our clients the other day is an app called Loop Energy. And if you have electricity and gas smart meters, you can connect them to this app, and then it's beautifully designed, amazing user interface, and it allows you to kind of start understanding how you're using gas, electric, and gives you some data around that. Now, but the whole point of that app, the people who have made it, and what you realise the subtext for all of it is after a bit it says, would you like to just show us on this map where your house is? So you draw it on the map. And it says, if you had solar panels, you could fit them all on this part of the house. And then once you've done that, it starts showing you how much money you would have saved and how much less electricity and gas you would have used because you'd be using solar, right? So this app, your first instinct is, it's a brilliant app to help me understand my new smart meters. But actually, it's about selling solar. Yeah. Now, at no point do you feel like you've been hoodwinked by this company. It's a win-win. You're getting brilliant data, but actually the whole thing was a way of kind of doing an upsell or a cross-sell into a different product line. So I think there's ways within B2B and B2C marketing that we can think about that as well, that you can almost think of value exchange first and then think about how your product then dovetails into that. Yeah. So I think there's some great examples going on. Who would have thought like 10, 15 years ago that people would have an app for their washing machine? Yeah. But, if it's giving you value, then great.
Yeah, it's that mutual value exchange, isn't it, around like consumers getting something that really works for them and actually hits the spot for whatever they're after in that moment, but also then the business being able to take something from that then allows us to be more effective, efficient in what the business's objectives are. And I think that starts to get quite interesting, because we will talk a bit about attribution and some of the challenges we've got around that. But I think attribution's been one of the sort of, if you like, bedrocks of all of our marketing activity, because we've always wanted to be in a position to say this activity is driving this performance, and therefore we want to be in a position to say, right, well, we therefore want to be able to influence the things that are working and dial down the things that aren't working. And I think that's always been the case, no matter how many channels have been out there, where you're using things in the funnel, etc. So I guess, how do we focus on attribution and where it's going, Rachel, and what are the key things that people need to be thinking about when it comes to attribution? Because I was on a call only the other day where a client in America was telling me about their using sort of first click attribution still, and I was totally baffled because I hadn't seen it for a while. Actually, I hadn't seen anybody use it for a while. Yeah, exactly. It's sort of been, it's become antiquated, I guess, in a lot of ways. But I found it really interesting, and I think that attribution conversation still comes up quite, like, it's super important for us as marketers.
Yeah, absolutely. The journey is super complex, and it's only growing every single day. So I think one of the biggest things that I'm seeing in the attribution space right now is about this marketing mixed modeling, or you might say it called like MMMs. And the idea behind this is that you are building models where you're feeding it data about different elements of your marketing. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be this channel as a whole. You can go more granular with the activity, and then ultimately that then helps you measure against your business KPIs. So it's not solely just focused on lead gen or like e-commerce. You can go against different KPIs within the business. Ultimately, the reason that people are going down this route is because there is a lack of trust right now in what is working and what isn't working in marketing. And I think what people are hoping to get out of these models is that they have a answer for what's working well, what isn't, what do I feed back into my strategy and do more of. Ultimately, how do I use this model to generate ideas and data-driven, or like basically make data-driven decisions. We have seen some players come into this space and try and make it more accessible to businesses. So like the likes of Google and Meta have released versions to the public. I think cynically, like, Google's never going to tell you that their marketing efforts don't work for your business. So it is hard to know whether these, I suppose, more accessible tools right now that require, I suppose, less sort of waiting from the end user, I don't know how unbiased they would be, which I suppose is a challenge and something to take into consideration. But ultimately, I think it is a nice step forward in businesses taking more understanding of their data and truly how different elements play a part in that. I'd say the only downside is it kind of comes across right now in the industry as like a one and done, like get a MMM and then you're sorted. And it's like, there's a lot of upkeep, there's a lot of learning, and you've got to constantly feed it. It isn't just sort of, I've bought it and now I'm ready to go and I can keep it for 2 years, because we've talked about how fast marketing's changing, how fast your strategy will change. You kind of can't just leave it with the same model you've always had. And unfortunately, when we get to like smaller businesses, this isn't really attainable day to day to have something like this in place. So it is great and it's exciting to see in the industry, but it's not really as widely accessible right now because it's so tailored to your business. It's not really just widely accessible to absolutely everyone, which I think can sometimes be a drawback of that too.
Yeah, I think for me, it's almost like, we were talking a year ago about universal analytics and the sunsetting of that, and people saw GA4 as being a bit of a one and done, didn't they? In the sense that as soon as we roll over onto GA4, they've done a brilliant positioning job on the Google, let's be honest, around like, it's going to be great, it's going to do all of these things. And we're still seeing it now where people are like, can we not go back and get universal analytics? Because GA4 is not really doing what we need it to do, and it's not as, I guess they're missing some of the functionality that was previously there. Now, some of the reason that the functionality is being removed are things like data privacy and changes in like being able to track people, etc. So there's good reason to do it. But I do think it's really interesting about, as you say, the way that it is positioned, and it is never done. It's that constant iteration, it's that constant evolution that's the real key, I think, when it comes to all of attribution modeling. It's not we put an attribution model in and therefore it's going to work forevermore for our business. It does require that constant work and diligence, really, to be thinking about, right, okay, is it actually still fit for what we're doing, and does it need to adjust because we've introduced new channels, or we've changed different approaches, or we're going for different audiences, like different geographies. There's a whole host of things in there. I think like the sheer volume of data for me is one of the things that I'd just like to explore a little, which is around, we are now collecting lots and lots of data, and I do think we've touched on it a bit. It can get very easy to get lost in the data, and I think things like data warehousing, etc., have been terms that have been thrown around. So yeah, for reporting, sort of what are we seeing in terms of how we utilize the data that we are now collecting, and how do we go about, I guess, pulling that together and synthesizing that into something usable?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think everyone's striving for that one holistic view for performance, and that is where you're seeing the data warehousing come from. So the idea behind this is you utilize a cloud-based solution to try and pull all of your data into one place. And we kind of saw this with the move to Google Analytics 4 anyways. Like since the software launched, Google pushed you to use that and BigQuery. So if you wanted to do anything slightly outside of the norm, if you wanted to access your data in a different way, the answer was BigQuery. And they made it so that you could connect to BigQuery for free. So it was almost like non-negotiable that you should use the two hand in hand. We've seen other businesses, they're doing it in like a Microsoft Azure tech stack. It doesn't really necessarily matter where you go, but the idea behind these is that it is a place that allows you to pull lots of different data sources together and lots of different data types together. And the idea is now you've got something in one place that you can then begin to, and most likely it's going to be feed to different data visualization platforms. But ultimately, now that you've got it in one place, you've started to craft that holistic view. And then the idea is that if you push it into a reporting platform, you might be able to start making some really informed decisions from it, because you've now got a broader view of performance rather than looking at everything in a silo, which is fundamentally sometimes where we find ourselves in marketing. So I think, again, that isn't to say that it's like incredibly accessible right now. From like sort of our experience, it is incredibly technical, the tech stack that goes behind that, and also can be quite costly to run at scale depending on how many channels you're doing, how your business is structured and things like that. So it is a step forward for this one overarching holistic view of a business's performance, but I think there's still strides to go to make sure that actually a lot of people can benefit from this type of data structure moving forward.
I think that another part of that as well, there's quite a few people on our team, Rach in particular, that have got quite strong maths backgrounds, and when you presented with a tool like BigQuery, what you're asking, you need to understand how you could take two sets of data and how you could, do they correlate in any kind of way. Things like when we were looking at that big TV campaign, and we were looking at, did the TV ratings correlate with the GA data? And you're kind of trying to establish what the norm would have been for that day, because you can say, okay, TV on, TV off, but what about the weather? What about this? What about that? And I think the knowledge of how statistics really works and how you can gain insight from data, it's not always a magic AI button, or hey, but just put these two things on the same graph and see what happens. So I think you still need a lot of that to, the tools are getting simpler, it's becoming more accessible, but you still need to know what the questions you can ask are.
Yeah, I think you think about strategy, it's often choosing what not to do as much as what to do, and I think we see it a lot with accessibility and how a lot of the information is out there now, the baseline information about if you want to run content, want to run organic social, want to run SEO, want to run PPC, like there's a massive amount of accessible information that if you really want to run that at an entry level, it's actually really quite easy to run things now at an entry level. But I think the real skill is about sort of choosing therefore what not to do and where not to focus, because I think they can all drag you in and they can all become a bit of black holes where you do like a 2 out of 10 job on 10 different things, and we see that quite a lot across organisations. And I think data is similar to that. It's about understanding what to collect, do you know what I mean? And almost therefore what not to collect. Because I think if you go out there and collecting everything all the time, it does become like super expensive, one, but it also can just leave you in a bit of a muddled, confused state, because actually what hypothesis are you actually testing the data with, and what are you trying to prove or not prove? It's like, are we just going to have like data sets that we just run queries against? You know, it's like, no, let's try and have sort of a purposeful approach towards sort of data collection, and then the hypothesis we set, and then the information that we therefore glean from it, rather than it just being like a spread bet.
Having said that, though, I do think I am a bit of a fan of take two sets of data that you think may not cannot be correlated, or might have been a bit irrelevant, and to see if there's a match, see if there's a pattern. So I agree with you, David, but I kind of think patterns and correlations exist in weird places. You know, like temperature is a really good one, right? Take, you know, and it's actually quite hard to get hold of really granular temperature for a particular location, but just see how much that impacted your metrics versus something like I don't know, macroeconomics, like what happened in the London Stock Exchange that day, you know. And I think there's really interesting patterns that you can see all over the place, and I kind of have a bit of a dream where the kind of weird data sets become more available, because I kind of think that they probably have more of an impact than maybe we think.
Yeah, but this thing I would say to that though is you then have to have
an argument.
Yeah, no, but you have to have a confidence, don't you, in the data? You have to have a confidence in the data, like the quality of the data that you're getting, but also confidence in yourself to be able to draw that analysis out, because I think there's a lot of descriptive statistics and analysis that does take place, which is so surface level that actually it's not really driving anything meaningful. So I think it starts to get quite a bit of a balance where you do need that understanding, confidence of what's available, and what therefore, right, it goes back to turning that data into insight. It's like one thing I have the data, but it's another thing to then glean insight from it. And we see it all the time where people will go, I've got all this data, and you go, right, okay, so what are your opinions on it? And they're like, I don't know. You know, and you're like, right, okay, so it's saying, right, okay, well, these are the things that we're seeing in that data, and therefore these would be our recommendations, I think is key. So I guess, what about the future? I guess a question would be, and I'll start with audience insights. So from an audience insight perspective, sort of, what do we think the opportunities are that are there? Sort of, where do we see things going, and what do people sort of watching, listening, need to be aware of as that moves forward?
Yes, so we've talked about how hard it is, right, to get audience insight. So I went down a wormhole of reading about synthetic data, and it's blown my mind because I'm quite excited about this. Yeah. But the idea behind this was for customers, or for businesses who don't necessarily have easily accessible customers, they have synthetic data has basically like emulated what their customer is, and sort of created a customer base, and then went and asked it questions and did some market research, all through the use of AI. And I think
tell people what synthetic data is, because I know we had this conversation though. We literally spoke for I think about 45 minutes, like one night about 3 or 4 weeks ago, just on synthetic data. So like in simple terms, when we say synthetic data, what do we mean?
It's just artificially generated. So it isn't you've went out and done market research and I can go and name the 5 customers who I spoke to. It's all about using, I suppose, like opinions and assumptions to craft what that audience would look like, and then go and do your survey as if you would if it was normal people. So it's all artificially generated through the use of AI. Yeah. And the idea behind why this is so, I suppose why this opens so many doors for audience insights, is because, especially in the B2B world, what I think you'll find happens is if your key decision maker is C-suite, the chances of you being able to locate this niche audience of C-suite who'll sit down with you for an hour and answer 20 questions about their business and these decisions and whatever, if you can do it, it's going to be incredibly costly, and one, it's going to be hard to find those participants of them. So I think it really does open the doors for market research, especially if you're going into a niche industry or sector, or especially in the B2B world where your ideal audience is maybe not that attainable. And so that's what really excites me, I think, about moving forward is what is going to be possible, because the fact that they can make a customer base and then survey it and give you market research kind of is insane. I think the thing that I'm probably a bit hesitant on is like, how much does a company's assumptions or things that they just want, their ideals, how much does that influence it? Do you know, if you say, well, my ideal customer base is X, Y, and Z, but is that really who your customers are? Or do you know, like we talk about C-suites, but who actually influences the decision? Is it delivery heads who utilize this day to day? And yes, a C-suite just signs it off, but actually the person who brings the idea into the business is someone completely different. So I do wonder how they'll tackle those sort of biases and assumptions that you might try and encourage to feed through into it. But ultimately, I think it's exciting to see where that can go next.
Is there any statistics around accuracy, you know, around that synthetic data and how accurate it actually proved if they tested it against sort of, dare I say, real data?
So they didn't provide a statistic exactly. They just said it was really close. They also did a test with Accenture, and they did Accenture's real research versus the artificial research. And so one of the sort of key stakeholders at Accenture actually gave a testimonial about it and how scarily accurate it was based on their real research. So they have done, they didn't quantify it, but they have done some real testing on it.
Yeah, and it is, isn't it? Because we talk about AI, we talk about machine learning across like so many different forums and different touch points around business, and in particular, obviously, digital marketing more generally for what we do. But it's like, I think this for me is one of the really interesting sort of developments, and I know we genuinely did sit and talk about it for a long time.
Yeah, I think I've told everyone I know.
Yeah, it sort of blew my mind a little, and I think it's really interesting to think where that's going to go. I think on the channel front, what are we seeing in terms of channel opportunities, where things are going in the future, and what the audience needs to be aware of?
Yeah, I think there's probably two channels that I think are quite exciting at the minute, and especially kind of for the future. I think the first one's radio. We were reading kind of a report the other week which is stating that radio's got the highest weekly listeners in the past 20 years, just kind of in the first part of 2024. I think a lot of that's come, and I think for me as well, like I feel like I'm actively listening to more radio now, but purely on the basis of the radio hosts are almost influencers in their right. And if you take, for example, Natalie O'Leary was Pretty Little Things podcast host. All of these podcast hosts have now made themselves influencers and now are actually going into the likes of the BBC and actually being like radio hosts.
Is that where I'm going? As part of the Mediaworks masterclass.
Yeah, literally, exactly. Becoming an influencer. Yeah,
terrifying.
LinkedIn, B2B
Don't
influencer.
give me that look, Paul.
But I think they're tapping into kind of like subcultures almost, and actually bringing these people onto kind of the big radio stations or attracting new audiences and especially that younger demographic. So actively bringing in these people who have attracted and built momentum within their own right from podcasts or from different brands. They're now bringing them into radio where it started to gain traction, and actually thinking about kind of from an advertising perspective, you can be really targeted on radio ads as well as be creative within the different kind of ways and means from an audio perspective. So I think that's kind of an exciting channel. I think in terms of like opportunities, I think TV is one, especially like TV on demand. I think it is like, well, TV is the most trusted method of kind of advertising that people do trust. I think consumer confidence is at an all-time low, so actively people are then going to turn to the methods that they do trust, and it's actually super affordable. Like you can pretty much get a TV ad for like 10 grand now, where you couldn't probably before, especially on the likes of like Sky AdSmart and like ITVX. So actually looking at different channels where you can start to test and be more creative and push the boat out a bit, broaden the awareness, but actually be specifically targeted maybe in like specific postcodes or different locations is kind of a big opportunity. And I think especially for maybe like smaller businesses who don't have huge media budgets, it's maybe something to test just to grow that awareness.
Yeah, and I know all our viewers will be looking forward to also watching the creative Mediaworks Masterclass, but a key trend that is supporting that as well is to buy the media has become cheaper. It can be more effective, can be more targeted, but actually to make content to put on TV is within everyone's reach now. So when you're saying smaller businesses, niche targeting, you can be on TV, you can be on radio. The whole thing has become way more easy to get to.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I was at a Google event last year and they were talking in similar ways about YouTube being, for a lot of the reasons you've all just mentioned, like they were talking about YouTube being like super accessible, creative, being able to put a real creative vision in front of people, super loyal audiences, very niche targeted, targeting capability. And it's really interesting, isn't it, around, like you say, where audiences are sort of migrating to and the targeting capability we've now got. And I think it's never been I think there's so many opportunities out there from a marketing perspective and from a strategic perspective. The challenge really is about, as I say, selecting sort of which composition of these channels and which mix of these channels at which point actually are going to drive the best performance. And I think, orchestrating that is really quite a sort of an interesting piece. I guess reporting, just to finish on that, like with things like, we've heard that people are wanting more reporting, that they're wanting a greater confidence is probably the way to put it, like having that validation around, right, if I spend this there, what is it going to actually sort of give us in terms of return? So, and being able to then report against that on a monthly basis is increasingly important. Yeah. So, sort of where do we see that going, Rachel?
We're already seeing pushes to real-time reporting. Marketers want data more instantaneously. They want it to be able to make decisions, and sort of, especially if it was to be a costly thing, they want to be well informed of that in a sort of efficient amount of time. So there is a real demand for how real time can we be. Some of the platforms don't even allow that, like Google Analytics 4, depending on how much data you have, they say it's up to 48 hours processing time. I still see on Google and Meta, there's always notes saying this data is only as up to date as this timestamp, So I think it's going to be hard to navigate that. But I think the thing around real-time reporting, really the thing where I'm a bit concerned about it is, do we make too many impulse decisions based on what we're seeing? Something isn't quite where we want it to be, but we don't let it learn, and therefore we actually fail to inform strategy any further because we're making such rash decisions constantly because of the pressure of making marketing work as well as it should. So I think real time is definitely, I think we'll see a push for it, but I also think hopefully, we sort of still give ourselves enough time to learn and take things that we can move forward into it. And then the second thing that I do see happening, and it wouldn't be right to not top and tail this with AI, but it is about that insights, that automated insights. If we've got vast data points, people want someone to just be able to tell you where the trend is, where the pattern is, what doesn't quite look right, what looks like an opportunity. They want someone to emulate some of that thinking. And I think the thing that's interesting about this is we have seen some platforms attempt it. Again, Google Analytics 4, that were underpinned with machine learning, more insights than ever before, but it really lacks business context. So it tells you things, but it doesn't have the context. So actually, I dismiss probably most of them because I'm like, not interested, not relevant, not going to make them more money, that sort of thing. So a tool, and people talk about these AI tools, AI reporting tools, and apparently it's super easy, but I don't know how the business context comes into that for making decisions, because it's not that businesses want insights, but they want an action that is directly going to help them make more money, more leads, etc. So I think where that tool would exist and how that comes about, I don't doubt people are going to try it, but I wonder how it's going to work in the future with sort of helping to ultimately push forward on your business objectives.
Yeah, and I think that's why there is such a premium on individuals and knowledge and insight and the capability to plug all of this together, because all of the platforms, the techniques that are out there are only in my opinion, as good as the people using them or the people interpreting them. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of. As I say, I think a lot of people are able to show us information or show us data, and we're able to look at how channels are performing. But actually, the real skill is, how does all of that work together? Like, how do you draw some conclusions from that that's then going to move things forward and improve it, that works with your business?
Yeah. I think it's really interesting when you talk about real time, because if you watch Formula One, if you watch football, there is real time data being captured. Live telemetry, live processing. This team has got the ball more in this section of the football pitch. We can see a pattern of this driver. They're always doing that on this lane. So real time data to make decisions is there. I think the question is, and you've also seen, I've seen that if you look at the case studies of like Microsoft, I think it's with the NFL in America, and they used it to promote the Surface because they were providing real-time data feeds to the NFL teams. Might have been NBA, but the tech companies are there. They're all really excited about live data, but why is it taking so long to kind of make it into the kind of marketing side? I'm sure Google and Microsoft have got live data to control their cloud systems and that kind of thing. So, I think the dreams are all there. And you're right, Rach, at the moment, you've got to be very careful that you see a spike, that you don't, jump off a cliff.
Yeah, and I think when you see it used in a sporting context, though, it's quite controlled, it's quite contained. There's a size of a pitch, there's only so many actors. I think the challenge you get into in marketing is, as soon as you start throwing consumer behaviour into it, and that's when you get significant diversity of thoughts and opinions and processes and different touch points along the way. And I think, I'm not saying it's impossible, because it is clearly a direction of travel, but I think that's why we've seen the adoption in things like a sporting environment, because it's relatively simplistic. Formula One, it's a controlled environment.
I think McLaren would argue there with you, David.
Yeah, but do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. There's a lot of variables when you're looking at
who might take on marketing. The might of McLaren,
eh?
Yeah. Okay, so final thing we always finish with this is, people watching, people listening, is we always ask you guys for one piece of sort of actionable advice that you would give people in each of your respective fields. So Nat, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I think it very much is take the time to understand your audience. I think if you take that time, you can understand what is the right message for them, what's the right channel. And ultimately, if you're lucky, you can then start to kind of look at where you're actually wasting budget, and then start to apply it to the right methods and the right means, and ultimately, hopefully, drive forward that performance.
I think from my side of things, like I've touched on a lot of emerging technologies and trends. I don't think you should be on the back foot. I think you should be aware about them, but hopefully I've tried to demonstrate that there is some pitfalls in some of them too. So don't necessarily dive headfirst into every single new thing that comes out there in terms of measurement and reporting, because it's really hard to know if it's going to add value to your business for the cost or the time to get these things up and running. So I'd say don't be on the back foot. Make sure you're keeping an eye on what's happening in the industry, but don't feel compelled to have to jump into every new form of technology that comes out there.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul.
Can I say two things? But if you are going to experiment, there's this kind of 95%, 5% rule. So you should spend 5% of your time and budget on things that are wild out there. It's an experiment. Let's see what happens. I think as an agency, we have a certain amount of people that are actively looking at AI and experimenting and exploring where that can go. And I think the second thing I would say is open yourself up. Click every accept a cookie box you can, and then say, yeah, I'm happy for my Skybox to track what I'm doing, and then be a real conscious consumer of the advertising that you're getting. See how it's working, see how it makes you feel, because that kind of lived experience is great to bring back into when you're looking at a client brief, or you're kind of going, I wonder how they work that out. And it does keep changing, and that in itself can just kind of give you a bit of an edge on thinking about what you could do next.
Thank you. I think that's a really good place to finish the session. So thank you very much for your input, everybody, and thanks everybody for watching and listening. As I say, I hope you've enjoyed today's Mediaworks masterclass, and we've got one the following month that's going to focus on creativity, where I think myself and Paul are back again to talk about all things creative with other colleagues as well. So thank you very much, and cheers everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.